Okay, good morning. I'm sorry, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Bethany Maddox, and I'm a customer care specialist here at Vitech Corporation. I'll be your host during today's webinar as Zane Scott presents Systems Engineers, the Logical Choice to Lead. Before we get started, I would like to review a few technical details. First, questions. Please submit your questions at any time using the question and chat functions in the GoToWebinar window. We will be monitoring these throughout the presentation and will address them at the end of the webinar, so please stay tuned. Second, I'd like to answer our most asked question. The webinar is being recorded today. You can find the recording in our webinar archive on the resources section of our website, and that will go online tomorrow. Now let me introduce our speaker. Zane Scott is the Vice President of Professional Services here at Vitech, where he is the head of consulting services. For more than 6 years before joining Vitech, he worked on DoD contracts, analyzing and improving processes, and applying best practice models using MBSE and CORE to provide the modeling support. He has taught in a variety of disciplines in college and professional classes. He's also a trained hostage negotiator and interventional mediator and speaks often on communication and conflict management. Welcome, Zane. It's great to have you with us once again.
Thanks, Bethany, and I'm glad to be with you today. I'd like to thank everybody for taking the next few minutes to share with us around the topic that I'm passionate about and have considerable interest in, and that's the topic of leadership, especially leadership as it applies to systems engineers. We find that systems engineers are naturally positioned to lead in terms of how projects are to be designed and how the design process is to be carried out. Having said that they're naturally positioned, that does not mean that they are naturally predisposed to step into a position of leadership. Leaders are developed over time, and leadership rests on a core set of skills. So acquiring those skills is particularly important to acting as a leader. The acquisition of those skills are not necessarily a part of a systems engineer's education, either their formal education or their avocational education as they expand their horizons. And yet, inevitably, because of the nature of systems engineering, we arrive at a point where the next step up, the next step forward requires that we step into a leadership position. So today we're going to talk about how systems engineers find themselves naturally in a position to exert leadership. We're going to talk about how leading well requires a particular skill set, and we're going to talk about 3 categories of skills that leaders or developing leaders need to acquire. The first is communication, which we will discuss as the backbone to all of the rest of the skill sets for being a leader. Without good communication skills, not only can you not be a leader, but you won't be able to carry out the skills around the other 2 major sets. The second set are the conflict management skills, and you may be surprised to learn that conflict is essential to the development of good designs. It's particularly critical in creative work, and systems design work is creative work. The third set of skills are the skills that make up what we call decision-making skills. Now, we could actually broaden this and say that these are the thinking skills, the creativity skills. Very often we think of decision making as narrowing our choices down to a final selection, a down select process. And as we'll discuss in a few minutes, that's part of the decision making process. But in order to have an effective down select, you have to feed it with an up select, if you will. So we'll talk about both sides of that equation. And then finally, we're going to talk about something that I call putting it together with styles. We'll talk about leadership styles, how we choose between them, and how these sets of skills intersect together to make up the leadership panoply. Now, first, we're going to talk about systems engineers as a logical choice to lead. I don't want to create confusion here in terms of thinking that in a 1-hour webinar, we could effectively teach leadership skills. In a 1-hour webinar, we can become aware of our opportunities to lead and talk about some of the places that we need to go and explore and learn and grow. But we're really not going to be able to instruct in skills. So this is not a skills planning webinar. This is an awareness experience. I'll be pointing you to an InterestBased course, which takes another step, and that course is 20 hours long, and it in and of itself is not sufficient as a leader's development course in terms of skills. It goes into more depth, of course, than we'll go into here, and it does touch on particular strategies and tactics and skills, but it's still not sufficient. The study of leadership and the development of leaders is a complex process that demands some time and attention well beyond the 20-hour survey course that we're teaching for InterestBased, and certainly well beyond a 1-hour course. But what I hope we gain today is to see how systems engineers are naturally positioned to lead, and then see where they need to point themselves in order to develop and exploit that opportunity. I think this quote is originally attributable to Peter Drucker, but it's been so widely said that it's become part of the common knowledge. When we talk about the difference between managers and leaders, we often say that managers do things right, but leaders do the right things. This is a critical distinction. Those of you who are familiar with some of the systems thinkers know that this tracks very closely the difference between efficiency and effectiveness. Efficiency is accomplishing the particular tasks using just the right processes and only enough to accomplish the tasks. Whereas effectiveness means accomplishing the right tasks, picking the right tasks. And that tracks very carefully what this lays out as the difference between managers and leaders. So leaders do the right thing, where managers do things right. Now, Stephen Covey puts a little sharper point on that when he said that management is efficiency in climbing the ladder of success. Leadership determines whether the ladder is leaning against the right wall. So Drucker says that a manager is good once the direction is determined, is good at taking the necessary steps to climb that ladder, to climb the ladder of success. Whereas a leader is a person who has the skills and abilities necessary to be sure that the steps lead somewhere where we want to go. That's very important because that gives us our first hint as to the substance of leadership. The critical central ability of a leader is around the ability to see a vision and then to translate that vision into tangible action. Very often we think of this as seeing an end state and tracking our way from where we are now to that end state, to that vision. Michelangelo talked about the task of a sculptor. He said a sculptor looks at a large piece of stone, a large piece of marble, for instance, and sees inside that marble the sculpture that he said was waiting to get out, waiting to be released. All of the marble in the sculpture is in that block, in that big chunk when you get started. And the sculptor's task is to chisel away what's unnecessary, to knock off all the pieces of marble that aren't necessary, that aren't going to become a part of the final structure, and liberate the sculpture that's inside. Now, doing that requires a vision. If you can't see what's inside, and Michelangelo, with all of his talent and all of his ability to do this, kind of treats that, he kind of goes by that real fast, but that critical ability to see what's inside there, to catch that vision, is analogous to the same kind of visioning ability that a leader has to have. So the leader has to be able to catch the vision and to see it and to understand it. Sometimes that means that the leader has to be the one to come up with the vision. Sometimes it's the leader who has a vision that they can use to lead people beyond a problem. The leader sees the answer. More often in our world, it's a matter of understanding and capturing the vision that comes from a broader group of people. Sometimes it means capturing the customer's vision. Sometimes it means taking a design group's vision and capturing that. But the ability to see that vision, whether it's the leader's own vision, or it's the vision of her team, or her team and her stakeholders, wherever the source of that vision, the ability to see it, capture it, and to figure out what the steps are to get from where the leader and the group are to begin with to where the vision needs them to be, is that critical visioning skill. So here's why I say that systems engineers are uniquely positioned to be leaders. The reason is that almost by definition, they are positioned to have that vision, to be responsible for that vision. Let's highlight some words in these definitions, and both of these are in COSI definitions. The first, of course, is the definition of a system, and the second is the definition of systems engineering. Notice that it's necessary to have a visionary or high-level view of your project, your process, your situation in order to practice systems engineering. We have to be able to visualize the system as a construct or a collection. We can't look at a system narrowly. We can't focus on one particular part of a system. We have to pull up to the altitude to at least see the entire system. That's the only way that we can see those results that are going to be obtained, that are not obtainable by the elements alone. Sometimes we get tricked by our training in analytic thinking. We're tempted to take things apart and try to understand the individual parts. And we forget to think synthetically, to think with this leader's vision. Systems engineering prescribes that we're an interdisciplinary process. We've got to be able to have a broad enough view to understand the differing disciplines and how they play together to produce the designs and the improvements that we want. We have to have a broad enough view to see the customer and the stakeholders' needs in order to make them a part of the solution, the driving part of the solution, and to satisfy them. And we have to have a broad enough view to see the system's entire life cycle. This means that systems engineers, by definition, are tasked with having the leader's vision, which puts them in a place that they can then be the leaders. I thought this was an interesting picture. This is fairly recent. It's from June the 24th from the International Space Station. It was shot by an American astronaut using a a commercial DSLR shot out of the spacecraft as they were passing over northern Lake Superior. That's Canada that you see in the landmass there covered with the green summer canopy. But if you look carefully at the highest level cloud there, you see that it seems to have ripples. And those are called gravity waves. They result as the air undulates. The wind blows through the cloud, and you're pushing warm, moist air together with colder air that's been over the land mass. And as those two meet and the wind blows through the cloud at their intersection, it undulates. It goes up and down, and it creates ripples. Interesting, but how does that relate? You can't see that if you're closer to it. You have to be far enough away. You have to have a high enough altitude view to even be able to see that and to understand that phenomenon. So those gravity waves, the ripples in those clouds, are visible only because of the viewpoint that we have in looking at that picture. The view creates positioning, and it's important to understand that just because we're in a position to lead, just because we have that view, doesn't mean we can implement. Leaders have to be able to catch the vision. We have to understand what's the customer, what's the stakeholders' vision. We need to understand what's the design team's vision, or we need to be able to help drive the creation of the division ourselves. But that's not enough. That's necessary, but it's not sufficient, because then we have to be able to cast the vision. We have to make that vision real for the folks who are going to go on the journey with us, the people that we lead. So to lead means more than to just see the destination. We have the position, and really the position just means an opportunity. We need to be able to capitalize on that opportunity. And that's the beginning of what makes leadership a complex discipline. How are we going to capitalize? Well, we capitalize by developing skills, and I've divided the skills into three basic areas. It's important to recognize that these skills build on each other, and we'll talk about that as we go through and touch on each one of these categories of skills. The foundational level are communication skills. Everything else rests on this. You can't engage in effective conflict management if you're not an effective communicator. The conflict management skills are the next level, and decision-making skills really turn on conflict management skills. That sometimes surprises people. Why would that be true? Why do you have to be a good conflict manager to have good decision-making processes? That's because I'm considering both the creative, what we'll call divergent thinking, and convergent thinking in the decision-making process. And your whole creative process rests on the quality of the conflict and the way that the conflict is managed within your organization or team environment. So the quality of your decisions, your decision-making skills, are going to rest on your conflict management skills. So we have to build these skills and build them on each other. Understand how they interrelate. Understand how they operate together. And then we need to be able to put them together. We need to understand leadership styles. We need to understand how the skills intersect, how the different leadership styles work, and understand that a leadership style, asking someone, what is your leadership style, is like asking a golfer, what's your favorite club? And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but a golfer's going to immediately ask you, where? On the tee? In the sand trap? On the green? What do you mean, what's my favorite club? Same thing goes with leadership styles. So we're going to touch on that, and that becomes the framework for our discussion. Some resources here, and I'll give you resources after each section. I have a compilation of those, and during the day tomorrow we'll get those posted to our community site so that you can have access to all of these resources. But two books, very important books and very useful books on taking the systems view and the implications of understanding the world in terms of systems are The Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge and Thinking in Systems, a primer by Donella Meadows. Both of these folks are MIT folks. Both of them worked with Jay Forrester in the area of systems dynamics. So if you understand what systems dynamics is, stocks and flows and feedback loops and those kinds of things, you're going to find that in here. But the other thing that you find in here is a discussion of the systems view and looking at and thinking about the world in terms of systems. So let's turn to that first skill area, to communication. We'll talk about the purpose of communication and some methodologies here. The purpose of communication is to establish a pool of meaning. You need as deep a pool of meaning as possible. Now notice I'm saying a pool of meaning, I'm not saying a pool of information. This is information put together to make meaning for your project, meaning for the vision, meaning for understanding the role of the system that you're working with in the world, in the broader systems. It needs to be a deep pool, a pool that you can draw on to gather the meaning that you need to put together the system that you're developing. To get a deep pool, you need as many sources as possible. This happens to be a picture of the James River after lots of the tributaries that contribute to it. It's starting to be a big river at this point, but it's nowhere without all of the streams that flow into it from the mountains that you're looking at in the background. They make the river, they contribute to this deep pool that we've photographed here. In the same way, you need to be able to communicate, because that's the vehicle through which meaning is going to come from your team members. So there are skills that you can learn and practice and become better at that promote your ability to gather this meaning, to communicate with your team and with the people external to your team. The single most important skill, and of course we can't go through all of the communication skills and do the exercises in this context, but if I had to single out a particular communication skill that's most important, it's listening. And with listening, you need to learn to listen to actually hear. Lots of times listening in our society means not talking while you're composing the answer to what you think the other person is saying. So we have a dialogue going, and the listener is simply the one being quiet at the moment. You're not really necessarily trying to hear what the person is actually trying to say. In real listening, you need to have empathy. You need to be listening with an eye toward understanding what the person is saying and why they're saying it. What's the information they're trying to convey? What are the conclusions they're trying to convey? What are their arguments? What's the structure of their reasoning from their point of view? The other thing that you convey by listening is you convey respect. You're telling the person, I want to hear what you have to say. There are lots of techniques that you can learn. Active listening is a technique where you listen and then you reframe what's said and you listen to the comments of the speaker on your reframing, and you go all the way until you reframe and the speaker says, yes, that's it, that's what I'm trying to say. So active listening is a very valuable technique that can be learned. Effective questioning is a valuable technique. Questions have two purposes. One is obviously that you want to discover the material that's in the answer to the questions. The second purpose is that you want to tell the person, I care enough about what you're saying to ask you questions. When somebody asks questions, they're saying, I'm interested enough in what you're saying to want to know more, to want to be sure that I understand. If there are magic words in communication, it's these three. Help me understand. That's the beginning of an effective question, almost no matter what follows it. Now, it's not no matter what follows it, of course. Help me understand why you're so crazy is not a very good question to ask someone, but help me understand better what you're thinking here. Help me better understand why you think that. All of those are good questions, and they're good questions because A, they lead to information, and B, they convey respect. But the bottom line is that we can learn to be better listeners, and we can continually improve our listening. The resources in the area of communication are a book on communications in general that I've found particularly valuable, and I return to time and time again in teaching or whatever, is a book called Crucial Conversations. This book didn't really present any earth-shattering revelations, things that I'd never learned in any other communications course, but it put it together in a way that it all made sense. It structured it up and engaged it in a way that everything began to make sense. And so I use this book. I've got a dog-eared copy, and I return to it over and over again. Lots of times we think when we're talking about communication that we're talking about outbound communication. If I were to advertise a course on communication skills, 75% of the class would come thinking I was going to talk about making presentations, making speeches, writing articles, outbound communication. And that is important. If you want to make your presenting better, I recommend these two books by Nancy Duarte. One is called Slideology, and the other one is called Resonate. Slideology is addressed to the mechanics of the design of presentations. It's an excellent book. Resonate is pointed more at the design of how we tell our story. Every presentation is a story, and how we design that story and how we design it to have the maximum impact is the subject of that book. And then TED Talks. If I could just give you one resource, if somebody said you can't tell them about anything else, you just got time to tell them about one resource, it would be TED Talks. If you have not discovered TED Talks, you need to immediately. Just go to Google and type in TED Talks and enjoy. I'll give you a warning that should be printed on the outside of every bottle of TED Talks, and that is that it's habit forming. Somebody once told me that you're a real computer user when you start using your computer one night after supper, and the next thing you know, you go, what's that light? And it's the sun coming up outside. That's the way it is with being a TED Talks fan. These things will hook you. But one of the best set of talks on presenting and making things understood on outbound communication are, I think he has 5 talks, 5 TED Talks, and that's by a Swedish scientist named Hans Rosling. Just Google him and then watch all of his TED Talks. He produces data in new and interesting and understandable ways. I think you'll be fascinated, and I think you will, like I, learn some techniques that you can use in making your own presentations. The second skill set is in the area of conflict management. Notice I didn't say conflict resolution. And that's because of the first lesson in conflict, which is that conflict is good. Conflict is necessary. Now that surprises a lot of people. We're taught, there's a couple of subjects we don't talk about, politics and religion. You don't talk about those at a social gathering because that's liable to start conflict, and conflict's bad. Conflict is only bad in the sense that we lots of times don't know how to handle it. But conflict is good. All change depends upon dissatisfaction with where we are now. When babies learn to get ready to learn to walk, their how well they crawl influences how quickly they will begin to walk. If they can get everywhere they need to get and get all of the things that they need to get a hold of and do all the things that they want to do by crawling, they'll keep crawling. They won't necessarily be driven to walk. The less satisfied they are with their crawling state, the quicker they'll learn to walk. Why? Because that tension, that conflict is motivating the change. Conflict is also the forge where we do our creative work, and we'll talk about that a little more down the road. But conflict is necessary to creativity and to effective group functioning, but it has to be managed. I tell classes in conflict management that conflict is like the fire in your fireplace. Uh, there's nothing nicer on a cool winter night, or as the fall nights get cooler, than a fire in the grate in the fireplace. If that fire gets out on your rug and into the curtains in the living room, it's a whole nother story. Fire is bad, but managed and contained, that fire is good. Same thing for conflict. We just have to learn how to handle it within the group. Now, the secret to that is creating a safe space. And by space, we mean a safe container or space, and we also mean process. When we create the safe container, we create an atmosphere in the group that answers the question, can I talk? Is it okay to talk here? If I talk, will I be ostracized? If I say something that doesn't go along with the group, how will I be treated? All of those are space safety issues. And we have to learn, and leaders are responsible for that safe space. So as leaders, we need to learn the skills and techniques necessary for creating that safe space to where people feel like they can contribute. Remember the pool of meaning? The pool gets deeper the more the contributions are. Well, an unsafe space chokes off the contributions to the pool and lessens the depth. The second thing is process. What is our process? If I talk, will I actually be heard? Have you ever been a part of a group where you felt like, I'm just not going to say anything because even if I do say something, no one's paying any attention, it's not going to do any good, I'm not going to be heard. So the first space consideration has to be with whether I'm valued and whether it's okay to talk here, and the second has to do with whether or not the process will allow me to be heard. Leaders are responsible for both of those. It takes both of those to have effective group communication and deal with the conflict in the group that can drive our creativity. Some of the skills that we can develop here are learning to engage in interest-based problem solving. We all have positions. Our positions are X must happen. But we have interests. We think X must happen because we think A. We have an interest in A. And our interest in A is promoted by X happening. So we adopt that position. If we negotiate around positions, if we try to solve problems around positions, then we don't get anywhere because we bang the positions together and the only option open to us is compromise. I had a political science professor at Virginia Tech who told us that he liked to quote someone who said that compromise is the art of finding that solution that makes no one happy. If you can get back to interests, then you can get to consensus. You can get to solutions that promote the greatest range of interests that are involved. So we learn skills that allow us to get back to interests. All this is based on that safe space, safe process, allowing the conflict of debate to take place in the context of a safe space and a safe process. The resources here, the same group that wrote Crucial Conversations wrote a more focused book called Crucial Confrontations, which talks about how we can disagree and how we can work with that disagreement in conversations, confrontations that matter. And then the classic work on interest-based problem solving is Getting to Yes by Fisher, Urey, and Patton. Now, Getting to Yes is about bilateral two-party negotiation. The people who jumped on the Getting to Yes bandwagon the quickest were the divorce lawyers and mediators. Immediately began to use that in Getting to Yes. But it can be applied, the same principles can be applied in large group multilateral conflict. So you can use the principles of interest-based problem solving beyond the context in which Fisher and Urey and Patton presented in Getting to Yes. But Getting to Yes is the original book and still explains it best. Now, if you want to learn about the importance of conflict and disagreement, I would recommend the TED Talk by Margaret Heffernan. Now, I'm not sure if it's Hefferman or Heffernan. TED had it both ways at various points in the website, and I've seen it both ways in the literature. But if you'll search for this, her presentation on Dare to Disagree is excellent on how disagreement and conflict can improve the ultimate solutions, and how dissent is a very important part of our process of hammering out the directions that we'll go. So I highly recommend that TED Talk. Now, the third area of skills are the skills around decision making. And as I said at the outset, for our purposes, decision making means feeding the set of alternatives as well as doing the down select from the alternatives. We as a society, and particularly we as technical people and engineers, get to be much more skillful at doing a down select than we are at coming up with ideas. We know how to knock them out. We know how to make a critique. There are two kinds of thinking: divergent thinking and convergent thinking. Divergent thinking is where we build from one idea to another, we accumulate our ideas, we broaden the pool, we deepen the pool, as we talked about with ideas. And then convergent thinking is where we sort through and we say, okay, we could do this, but we probably can't do that. And we begin to establish criteria, etc., and we begin to make our down select. Our problem is that we're much better at convergent thinking than we are at divergent thinking. And perhaps because of that, we begin to apply convergent thinking much too early in a creativity process. So if we were going to develop a skill, I would think that we would need to focus that in the area of divergent thinking. Um, if I were going to stay where I was with respect to one of these two, it would be convergent thinking. We probably all have pretty good convergent thinking processes, although we can improve those, and we'll talk about a technique here in a minute. But working on the divergent thinking skills, our creativity skills, look at the literature around creativity. I had to fill out an application the other day and go through an interview for a selection for a website. And one of the things they asked me was if you could attribute your success uh, across your career to one thing, what would you attribute it to? And after some thought, I said, I think I would attribute it to curiosity, to that thing which causes me to want to know. I want to know why. I want to know how. I want to know about things. And that's driven me to lots of discovery across a career and driven me to survive uh, creative processes and decision making processes that I might not otherwise have done quite as well with. As I think back on my educational career, the best teachers that I had were not those who gave me the most facts. The best teachers I had were those who have made it impossible for me to go into a bookstore without risking financial ruin. Uh, that curiosity that drives creativity is the valuable thing, and that can be a learned skill. That can be planted. You can acquire that. Particular group techniques can be acquired that promote divergent thinking, like brain writing. We could spend half a webinar on the brain writing technique and what all it does. If you don't know about brain writing, I would suggest that you Google it, look it up, and one of the resources that I'm going to suggest has a good explication of it. It's a great divergent thinking tool. Um, and then ranking tools in the area of convergent thinking, all of the myriad of nominal group techniques, the rankings, the competitive ranking skills you can acquire to help the quality of your convergent thinking. One of the best that I've come across for working with a group is a technique called the full analytical criteria method, in which you reduce your complex decision where you're going to choose, say, from 5 alternatives using 5 different criteria. Um, you turn those kinds of ranking decisions into head-to-head ranking. You wind up setting a weight for all of your criteria, and then you use weighted criteria and go one criterion at a time and compare your alternatives with respect to that criteria, and then give the end result the weighting that you've determined in your first process. Complex technique. It takes a little while to learn, but once a leader understands it, you can lead a group right through it. And it's almost magic in the way that it works with groups. The neat thing about it is the value of that technique is not in the technique or the numbers that you get out of it. The real value of that technique is in the quality of the discussion that emerges as this guides you into these head-to-head comparisons. So that's an example of something that you can learn and put to use. Now, I promised you that I would give you a resource that embodies brain writing, and it also embodies the FACM, and they're contained in the Memory Jogger series that's put out by Goal QPC. They've been out for a while. I have copies that I've nearly worn out. they have a number of different tools and approaches and are just really a gold mine for valuable techniques. I recommend the Thinker's Toolkit by Jones and Thinker Toys by Machako. Both of those books are very valuable. And a book called Game Storming by Gray, Brown, and Macanudo is a very, very interesting book on how we can approach this process of decision making. Once we get those built up and on the way toward developing them, and it's very important to recognize this is a never-ending process. I'm learning as I go. As I was putting this presentation together, I was sticking things in my to read later, sending things to Evernote. I was, coming across things that I want to take a look at to broaden my menu of techniques and skills. So it's not a process you can get over with, but as you acquire these skills and begin to bring them together, you need to look at their intersections and think about how they fit together, and then look at how they're incorporated into leadership styles. As an example, there's some very interesting articles out there. We're all familiar with the brainstorming technique. And you remember in brainstorming, the first rule of brainstorming, in fact, if I ask everybody to type in the first rule of brainstorming, you probably all get it right. And that is that when you're suggesting ideas, you can't make any critique. You can't say, oh, that's a dumb idea, or I don't like that, or we can't do that, or that's way too expensive. All of those are comments inappropriate to the brainstorming process. And this was touted. Brainstorming began to be used in the 1950s and has been used consistently, has lots of momentum, lots of people use it. But there is some consistent criticism, especially academic criticism, of the effectiveness of brainstorming as a technique. The first groups of critiques are in the area of saying what happens with brainstorming is that you don't get as good ideas out of brainstorming as you would out of individuals just sitting down and making lists without participating in the group, because when the group gets together, they're driven by some desire to not deviate too far from the norm, to wonder, okay, I know he's not allowed by the rules to say that what I'm thinking is stupid, but he's thinking that what I'm thinking is stupid, so I'm not going to say that. That just sounds too stupid. I'm not going to look silly in front of the group. And we can even get into a group think kind of a pattern that reduces the value of brainstorming. And then the second area of criticism of the brainstorming is that real creativity, the value of real creativity, is enhanced by dissent. When I have an idea and try it out on folks who don't agree with me, I see weaknesses in the idea that need to become stronger. I get other ideas that would make it stronger. I begin to change my thinking, to move and morph, and the quality of what I'm thinking is enhanced by dissent. And if you follow the rules of brainstorming, you don't have dissent, so you deny yourself that piece that can enhance the quality, and you deny yourself the quality that can come out of that. And so there are lots of studies that say that brainstorming is really not that much more effective than individual idea generation, and certainly not as effective as idea generation where dissent, critique is permitted. Well, what's really going on here? The no critique rule in brainstorming is put there to make it a safe space so that people don't worry about what they have to say being a reflection on how they're valued as members of the group. That's the purpose of the no critique rule. So in an effort to create a safe space, you cost the group some things in terms of the groupthink criticisms and the lack of dissent criticisms. However, if you engaged in brainstorming where you had exercised your conflict skills to create a safe space, and of course, in order to create a safe space, you needed to develop your listening skills and to develop your effective questioning skills so that that can help you make a safe space and a safe process, then you could engage in brainstorming and people would not be afraid to say what they thought, nor would they be afraid to dissent, and they would feel free to participate without threatening the safety of the person as a member of the group. So you wouldn't need the no critique rule. You could have your cake and eat it too with the brainstorming. The point here is not so much to evaluate all of the criticism of brainstorming and report on the literature as it is to say all of these skills are tied together. And an effective leader not only develops the skills within any one of these disciplinary areas, but an effective leader sees how they all play. And again, this is coming back to the taking that high-level view, position to think of this in terms of systems and how the system around all of this works together, how all these skills interweave and interplay to produce the system, which is the process of your designing the systems that we're commissioned to design or improve. So everything laces together and everything, it helps to be able to think systemically. And again, that points right back to systems engineers, because we're supposed to, by training and discipline and practice, think systemically. So once again, we may not have all the skills. We need to go out there and learn skills, but we're uniquely positioned to put them to work in most design settings. Now, the last thing that we talk about here are leadership styles. There are lots of models that slice up leadership styles in very different ways. These 6 happen to come from Daniel Goleman's work, Primal Leadership, which is the book I'm going to recommend out of this. And he has divided leadership up into 6 styles: visionary, coaching, affiliative, democratic, pace setting, and commanding. I recommend that you read Primal Leadership. It's an excellent resource. And as a part of it, you'll come to understand the differences in these styles and how they might play. On a personal level, we need to not develop one style of leadership. We need to develop a repertoire. We should have a menu of leadership styles available to us, and we should understand how those styles work. I'm 6 feet tall and 250 pounds, so that's a particular physical presence. Some things about some leadership styles work with that kind of a presence, other things don't. You have to learn, what is it about my personality, about my physical presence, about my position. Some things in some leadership styles work better for the person who's at the top or near the top. Other leadership styles work for people who are positioned at different or lower points in the organization. So you have to have a grip on what the menu of styles is that's available to you, and B, know what those styles look like if you adopt them and put them to use. How do you tell where to put them to use? That's all dictated by the situation. What's appropriate to the situation? Very often his affiliative style or the democratic style would be very appropriate for working and leading in a peer group where you have lots of time for discussions. I spent 3.5 years on a tactical team, and one of the things that we had to do was to go and get somebody out of where they were hiding. So that involved taking a breaching tool, a big pipe with a handle on it. The pipe was poured full of concrete, and you'd swing that against the door, and the door pops open, and then the team goes in behind the breached door. Now, when you pop the door and step inside the building, it's not the time to sit down and say, okay, Fred, what do you think about this? Joe, what do you think we ought to do now? The leader in that situation needed to develop a command style and to make decisions, and people needed to learn to be responsive. So an affiliative leadership style in that setting probably wasn't appropriate, rather. The situation tells you, am I leading from above, or am I leading a peer group? Am I exerting leadership from below? And by the way, all of those are possible. Can determine what kind of a style and how I will apply it. All that needs to be a conscious choice. All that needs to be the result of some study and work. The resources here are the book Primal Leadership that I referred to by Daniel Goleman. He's the guy who wrote the book on emotional intelligence. And the TED Talk is an excellent one. Stanley McChrystal, the former general, Army paratrooper, and in an excellent TED Talk on leadership called Listen, Learn, Then Lead. I commend both of those to you. Now, as I told you, we're running a course through InCosi, which InCosi is providing free to its membership. Ultimately, it's a 20-session course designed to be presented 5 sessions per quarter. In the quarter beginning in April, we presented 5 sessions on communications. In July, we began 5 sessions on conflict management. Beginning October the 1st, we will start a 5-session segment on decision making. And in January, we'll close up with leadership styles and some other topics. So you're invited, if you're InCosi members, to log on and join in those sessions with us. This is the information on how you would get access to that. If you have missed the first 2 quarters, the first 10 sessions, those are posted on the websites there at the links, and you can view those and look at the slides. The links to this course will also be included in the resource materials that we'll make available. If you would like further information, we'd refer you to our website and our community site. You're certainly free to contact me directly, and that's my email there. We invite you to be active in our community and to submit comments and participate. Certainly want to thank you for joining us today and spending this time with us. I hope it's been helpful and informative. And now, if anybody has any questions, I would be more than happy to take a stab at it.
Thank you, Zane. We do have a couple of really good questions, so I thank everybody who submitted those. If you haven't yet, I do encourage you to join the discussion and submit your questions using the question and chat feature in the GoToWebinar window. Zane, let's get started with a question from Arthur. And Arthur wants to know, aren't leaders natural born?
No, that's a pretty common myth. What you are born with is a set of skills, or not skills, but a set of abilities or inclinations that make particular approaches and particular skills more effective in your hands than others. You know, you learn, some of us are extroverted, some of us are introverted, and so knowing that about ourselves tells us which way we can lead and what tactics will be more effective, but it doesn't make one of us a natural leader and another one not.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is from Drew. And Drew is curious to know what is the most important skill for leaders to learn?
I think probably the most important skill is the listening skill. Um, if it and I would refer you to two ends of the presentation, to the end where we talked about active listening and the importance of that in communication, because that's foundational in terms of all of the other skills, and then wrap that in the wrapper that General McChrystal puts it in as he talks about listening and learning from the people that you lead and from your environment. But if I had to pick out one skill that would help you as a leader, it's that ability to listen.
Thank you, Zane. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I
I'm
can.
sorry, I must have had a problem with my mute button here. Okay, our next question is from Rebecca, and she wants to know how she can start learning to be a leader.
I think if I were starting out to learn to be a leader, I think probably the first thing I would do would be to pick up some of these resources and to delve into them, and they will lead you other places. Um, but I've tried to select these as a good smorgasbord of beginning resources in each one of the areas. So I would commend you to that and get you started. The other thing is to practice. Be involved in groups, whether that's the PTA, a civic group, your church, whatever, and observe people who lead. Observe people who lead well and observe people who don't lead so well, and participate, and at the point that you're comfortable, try your own hand and practice.
Okay, great advice. Our next question is from Nazanin, who has concerns about a group listening and possibly that it's a confidence issue. So, how do you suggest working to gain the confidence of a group?
I think your confidence in your group in terms of, and I'm assuming here that you're asking, how do I get to the point where the group has enough confidence in me to listen to me?
Yes, I think that's what's being asked.
And I think that turns, especially in a technical group, one, on your technical competency, but perhaps even more importantly on your attitude and your openness to listening. People like to be listened to. I've found that one of the most effective techniques to build a relationship, which can then lead to mutual respect, is to get people to talk about what it is they do. Draw them out, get them to talk to you. So I would say that listening ourselves is our most important avenue toward a group having confidence in us and being able to listen to us. If you launch in basically by saying, look, listen to me, you're probably lost from the get-go. So you have to build that relationship, and that's effectively done by listening.
You make a great point, Zane. What's the saying I've heard here around the office? Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Does that apply here?
Yeah, I think it does, and I think somebody famous said that, like
I'm sure somebody did.
St. Francis of Assisi, maybe.
Quite possibly. We sure do quote it a lot around ViTech. Well, our last question, Zane, is from Brian. And Brian wants to know what's more important for systems engineers, technical skills or leadership skills?
I think it's a question that depends on where you are in your career. When you come in the door, it's going to be your technical skills. As you build your competency and reach that level of competency and establish your pattern as a learner, that's going to start to take a second seat, if you will, to building your leadership skills and developing your leadership skills. There are lots of, and the world has lots of room for people who are technically competent, but we probably would not want to lead. But most of us will get to a point in our career where the next step depends upon being able to lead. And that means being ready to lead. And that means understanding and developing your leadership skills. So I think the mix of those two changes over time. Neither one of them ever goes away, but they do change and mix as to where you are in your career.
Thank you so much, Zane. I appreciate your taking these questions and giving us so much insight. This does wrap up the Q&A for today. We were able to answer all questions, but if you think of a question that you didn't get a chance to send in, I do invite you to post those on the forum of our community site at community.vitechcorp.com. At some point tomorrow, Zane will also be posting information on so many of the resources that he had in today's webinar. So take a look at our community site to get that information tomorrow. As I mentioned before, a recording of today's webinar will be posted on our website in the resources section, and that will go online tomorrow as well. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us for today's presentation. At the conclusion of this webinar, a survey will open on your screen, either in a new browser tab or in a new window. I sure hope you'll take a moment to provide us with feedback on today's presentation and to let us know what topics you'd like to see us cover in a future webinar. Once again, thank you for joining us and have a wonderful day.